Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Backlog Bunker. This week, we're talking about Sonic again, hopefully for the last time, because I've gotten close to just 100%ing the game, and the only thing I have left to do are the challenge acts, which are probably going to be the footage for this episode. But, I've done everything else, gotten all the achievements, which brings me to, the one thing I want to talk about this week, because I promise you we're not going to talk about Sonic very long, but the one thing I want to talk about this week was the fact that I don't really like how Sonic Generations almost feels like Sonic X-Shao Generations feels like a dumbed-down version of the original, because it took out a lot of the achievements that were, skill-based, like beating Green Hill in a minute, or beating Chemical Plant without touching the water. And I miss those because they were really good incentives for wanting to play the game better, because the only way you're going to beat Green Hill in a minute is if you play the best path in Green Hill. The only way you're going to beat Chemical Plant without touching the water is by playing the best path on Chemical Plant. So to see those achievements be, taken out is very disappointing, and tangentially this applies to the 30-second challenge as well, because that was a really unique way of scoring people based on speedruns. It's not just, hey, how fast can you beat the level, it's how far can you get specifically in a 30-second span of time, which for one made them very replayable because it only takes 30 seconds to get into another run. And then on top of that, it was just different. It's not exactly, oh, you have to beat the stage, it's you have to get far. It made people think about things a little differently, which I thought was nice. And it would have been cool to see that for the Shadow levels too, but they didn't do it for Shadow, and they took it out of Generations, so who knows. And I can't be very optimistic that we'll get any, post-launch updates for Sonic Generations, because it's still in the old engine as far as I'm aware. So we're not going to get any new content. The best they can do is change up some animations and put those stupid fucking Chao in, which, by the way, is an awful collectible, because I love the red rings in Sonic Generations. I think that they are very well placed and well considered, except for a handful that I don't like because they put them on, worst paths, so the only way you'd ever get to them is if you're playing the game worse, or if you fucking take the character hints and go, oh, okay, so it's there. But for the most part, the red rings are very, very good in Generations, but the Chao are just kind of, randomly placed about. It's like, oh hey, there's a Chao around this corner, and then you grab it. Okay, the vast majority of them requiring you to slow down to be able to get them, which is stupid. And then a lot of them, even more so than the red rings, placed on worse paths. Because with the red rings, it was maybe one or two per, I don't even know about per level, it might be per zone, that would actually be placed on a worse path, or at least a blatantly worse path. Maybe one per act. I'm gonna say one per act for now, but it might be even less than that. But of the Chao, it seems like there's, of the 6 between 3 per act, it seems like 2 of them will almost always be, 2 of them per act, and half of them in the zone total, maybe, will be placed on explicitly worse paths. Since I've done it in very recent memory, one of the prime examples is, I think, Planet Wisp for Classic Sonic. All of the Chao are placed on the worst path. You would never ever see them if you played the game well, which I know because even, playing Planet Wisp is the worst zone in Generations, but even then, I know where the top paths are, and I usually go for them, but I never saw any of the Chao, and when I was wondering where they were, oh, turns out they're all on the worst path. Not helped at all by the fact that the in-game hints for where the Chao are vague at their absolute best moments. They're nowhere near the red ring hints that the characters give you. The Chao hints are, actually useless. And luckily, since I don't respect the Chao as a collectible, I just look them up, because I don't give a shit about them. Because the way I feel about collectibles in games, especially ones that are, more hidden, is that I want to go for them if the game gives me the drive to want to go for them. And to find them of my own accord and not just look them up. Because, like I said, I respect the red rings in Generations. I think they are very well considered, so I never looked them up when I was getting them. I just went by the character hints and looked, because I thought they were fun to go for. Minus, I think there's one in City Escape that's on the worst path, and I couldn't find it for the fucking life of me, because I'd actually never, it's when you're snowboarding down the way or whatever, and the upper path, the better path, is to take the ramp, near the end of that snowboarding section, onto a wire, down to the slope or whatever, but since the ramp is not very easy to miss, or sorry, it's not hard to get onto, I would always take the top path, and so whenever I was looking for the red ring, I was fucking baffled, because I couldn't find it. And so I caved and I looked that one up, and then turns out it was, oh, you have to just completely miss the ramp, which again is kind of hard to do, especially if you're paying attention in any capacity, and then take the worst path to 2 different ramps that take you to the red ring. So yeah, that was weird. But for the most part, like I said, I respect the red rings, so I didn't look them up aside from that one. But I didn't give a shit about the Chao. I finished all the Chao in Green Hill, and then I couldn't find one of them in Chemical Plant. I think it was Act 1, and then I decided I was going to look all of them up, and I'm glad I did, because some of them are in some fucking awful places. Again, they are on the worst path. Why the fuck would I be exploring down there? It's this whole thing. And the last word on Generations, hopefully, is that they also didn't fix a lot of the jank present in that game. And now granted, Sonic Generations is very, very good in spite of its jank, but its jank is very difficult to get used to because Sonic Generations is like the one Sonic game that I've played in recent memory that I actually wanted to do better at. So things like Sonic being able to turn around in midair being inconsistent is ass. Like, sometimes, and I can't tell if it's just for the boost or if it's also applied to the homing attack sometimes, but like if you go off of a spring or something and Sonic's facing one direction, you can hold the other direction and homing attack and Sonic will turn around, but you can't do that for the boost, and it fucks with my muscle memory because I think, oh, let me just turn around here when I'm boosting, and it's like, oh no, you can't do that. But the homing attack works just fine, and so I have to constantly remember myself, it's fine for the homing attack, but not fine for the boost, even though the boost is the one that I'm actually going to want to use to like propel myself forward quickly. It does help that the drop dash is applied to Modern Sonic, so I don't necessarily have to use the boost to turn around if I don't want to, but there are very few sections of the game where you want to use the drop dash over the boost, at least for Modern Sonic. So it doesn't work quite as well, not at all aided by the fact that to do the drop dash as Modern Sonic, you have to do a homing attack dash first, so that's not fun. Then there's a lot of like small but noticeable things. Like on City Escape, there's this one section where City Escape for Classic Sonic, there's one section where you run up like a half loop onto like 3 falling red platforms, and the way the loop sends you onto the first platform sends you onto some janky piece of geometry where Classic Sonic will get stuck for like half a second. Maybe not even half a second, it's like a fraction of a second. It is it's a very small span of time, but it's enough time for if you were trying to get a frame-perfect jump off of the red platform, you're not going to be able to, because you're going to be delayed for just that tiny little bit of time by Classic Sonic getting stuck on something, and it's just not good, and I wish they fixed things like that, but they didn't. Instead, they put in a bunch of stupid fucking chow, and changed all the stupid fucking animations, and changed all the stupid fucking lines, because that's what Generations needed. Knuckles to get a worse line read, or to have other people perform the exact same lines with different voice actors. Then, in terms of more Sonic stuff, because there's never quite enough Sonic stuff, I also played Sonic 3 on stream, and Sonic 3 is a strange game to me now, because for a long time I considered Sonic 3 one of my favorite games of all time. Not like the top 10, but it's definitely close. I'm pretty sure I have it in my honorable mentions on Backlogged. So Sonic 3 is a game that is very near and dear to me. However, in replaying it for the stream, I was not having that great a time, and it's bizarre to me, because it's not like a lot of other games where I've grown older and I just don't like them as much, because I played Sonic 3 like 3 years ago, and I liked it just as much as I did before the stream 3 years ago, and I have not changed much as a person in 3 years. Like, look at my like game taste from even 6 years ago. 6 years is 28. Yeah, from like 5, 6 years ago, and it'll be a very different critique you'll hear from me about basically anything. But for Sonic 3, like I said, that was only 3 years ago. I was well into COVID, which was at the point where I was becoming more of who I am now. So I can't imagine that my tastes were very different. So I can't really imagine what the difference is for Sonic 3 to me. I had to drop from a 9 out of 10 experience to a 6 out of 10 experience. And the only differences are two things. For one, I used save states when I played it last time, because classic Sonic games sure are 90s games where they throw some old bullshit at you that is just not fun. And I think that is a fair criticism from me now about Sonic 3, because replaying the game now, it's got a lot of beginner's traps that I probably just didn't think of much before, because if I got caught by a beginner's trap and it fucked me up or whatever, I would just reload a save state. But now that I'm playing the game on stream, legit, just lives, not doing this, that, the third thing, it is way, way, way more annoying to get hit by some bullshit off screen. And so I think it's fair for me to talk about that, and that might drop it for like, it's like a 7, maybe. Still a good game, but a good game dragged down by a lot of that bullshit. But what pulled it down to a 6 to me was going for the Chaos Emeralds, because looking for the Emeralds is not fun. The special stages themselves are still amazing, still the 3rd best special stage in the series, because Rush and Colors DS are extremely, extremely good, but the blue balls are still the 3rd best special stage. They're amazing. But the problem with them is that going for them is not very fun, because another thing that Rush does that makes their special stages so great is that you can retry them, like, instantly. If you've been playing the game well, you'll have a lot of boost, and if you have a lot of boost, you can just get right back into the special stage with the rest of your boost. But with Sonic 3, it doesn't matter how well you're playing the game. If you found a special stage and you fucked it up, that's it. You gotta go find another one. And like I said, fighting them isn't fun because they often require exploration, which I don't like in Sonic at all, but in 2D Sonic is especially boring. And then either exploration or they require you to be on the top path and then like make a jump into a hidden wall or some shit, which is also not very engaging. It got to the point where in later levels, and as I was playing, I would just start hugging walls, being like, well, maybe there's an emerald in here. I don't fucking know. And it wasn't cool. I didn't like it. Even like the very first Chaos Emerald you get on Angel Island is an example of how not fun it is to look for these Chaos Emeralds. You're playing a Sonic game, you're going to be going forward, especially in the first stage of the game where you know you're gonna have a little bit more leeway in trying to speed through things, but the very first fucking emerald they want you to get is drop down to the lowest path and then go backwards. It's the same shit as the Chao from Generations. It's stupid, and it's just not fun to look for. So, but the dilemma that it brought to me is, does that actually drop Sonic 3's score? Because while yes, it is annoying to go for the Chaos Emeralds, do you have to go for the Chaos Emeralds? Because some people might say, no, you don't. They're a collectible, and the true final boss is more like a secret final boss, if you want to think of it that way. And so it's not strictly required to get all the Chaos Emeralds. You can technically beat the game without them. However, that brings up a very interesting question of what is optional in a video game? Because technically, you don't have to do anything in a video game. You don't have to play it at all. You can turn it on and then turn it right back off. So, how do we make the line between what's truly optional in a video game and what's kind of optional? Because like I said, if you think of the final boss of Sonic 3 as a secret final boss, then like, yeah, sure, some people might say it's optional, but I would argue it's the true final boss. That is the actual end of the game when you fight with Hypersonic or whatever. I forget what the final boss is actually called, but when you're Hypersonic. And like, would people apply this to other games in the Sonic franchise? Because like, the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic Generations are not given to you by the store, you have to go out and get them. So, does the Egg Dragoon count as the actual final boss if you just choose not to get the Chaos Emeralds? Or does it have to be the Time Eater? But hey, maybe you might argue that it's different because the Generations doesn't have special stages. Well, not on console it doesn't. On the 3DS, there they are, same as normal Sonic games. They're a little bit easier to get to because they're just right there in the menu, but still, they are there. And I really don't have an answer to this question, but that's part of what this series is for, is thinking about these things like, what does it mean to really be optional in a video game? I might keep this for a weekly topic later on. It's not going to be this week's weekly topic because I want to talk about something else, but it's something to consider, because genuinely, I think if you ask 10 people, you might get like 7 different answers about what actually is optional in a game. I was talking to someone like a year ago, I want to say, and we were talking about Sonic Frontiers, and they were talking about the seeds, and their opinion was that you had to 100% a game before you could judge it, and I think that's fucking stupid, but some people genuinely believe that, and obviously I believe in that to some extent, because I believe that you should get every emerald in Sonic 3 to count as actually having beat the game, and if getting all the emeralds isn't 100% in Sonic 3, then what is? So, as much as I think that their point about Sonic Frontiers was stupid, because Sonic Frontiers is a very different thing, I can't argue with the whole people's opinion being on like what's optional and what's not. You might argue that just seeing the credits counts as being the game, and so whatever you do to see the credits is whatever you do to see the credits. If it's beating Urizen in the first mission of DMC5, and you don't play the entire rest of the game, then you beat DMC5. So I'm very curious to hear you guys' thoughts about this, if you do have any, so comment those if you actually have some opinion about like what it means to really beat a game and what counts as being optional in it, because generally that might change my score for Sonic 3 depending on what is really the optional. Now granted, it's not a huge change, it's between a 7 and a 6, but still, given a different week and with more time, I'm probably going to revisit this as a weekly topic at some point, so keep it in the back of your mind. And now for what's probably the contentious Gavin topic for this week, which is Final Fantasy VI, because I've been playing the entire Final Fantasy series, and I've not talked about it on this series yet because I'm saving that for something that you'll see soon enough. But for now, I'm going to talk about them like in the moment as I played them. And what I did this week in playing Final Fantasy VI was I beat the game, which I won't have any footage for because I played it on my Steam Deck, and I'm not going to give you guys like 580p footage for the series. Taken in 5-minute chunks from clipping them on my Steam Deck. So I'm just gonna put up whatever footage, but I beat the game. And spoilers for Final Fantasy VI, obviously. And I don't like Final Fantasy VI, and I don't really get why it's one of the most beloved Final Fantasy games ever. Because even having not played 7, I can tell you why people love 7 just from, like, cultural osmosis. Even not having played 10, I can tell you people like about 10 from, not cultural osmosis, because I listen to two guys talk about 10 all the time. Well, not all the time, but they love 10. So I've heard a lot about 10 from either their videos or from other people's videos, because I think one of the most interesting videos on Final Fantasy X is someone who doesn't like the game that I've watched. But even then, that gave me more perspective on the game itself, and so even just knowing more about the game was like, okay, I see what people like. Aside from those two, I can't really tell you which are the, like, widely beloved Final Fantasy games. Point being, it's 6, 7, and 10, and 7 and 10 I get. 7 more so than 10. Like I said, I haven't played 10, and I only kind of get it because half of my perspective comes from someone who doesn't like the game. But for 6, I've only ever heard people like the game, but I've never exactly heard why, and that should have been a huge red flag to me, because that's exactly what happened for Persona 5, and Persona 5 ended up disappointing me massively because of that. And it's not exactly the same, because Persona 5, it colored my perception in a negative way, where I originally called Persona 5 like a 4 out of 10 game, when it's not nearly that bad, it's like a 6. But my visceral reaction to it was caused purely by the positive reaction to it. But since I've learned my lesson from since Persona 5, I managed my expectations for Final Fantasy VI, made especially easier by the fact that I've only ever played the first 5 Final Fantasy games before it, and they certainly did not give me a good perception of the series, so I was definitely bringing myself back for Final Fantasy VI and knowing to keep my expectations in check. However, this was still not enough to save me from heavily disliking it, because Final Fantasy VI, much like Final Fantasy IV, just doesn't do much to make me like it. For one, to get the obvious out of the way, it's an ATB game, and I hate ATB. I hated it since Final Fantasy IV, I hated it in Final Fantasy V, but at least Final Fantasy V was able to sort of sway me into liking it because of the job system. And Final Fantasy VI does not have the job system. It doesn't even have anything close to the job system. The closest thing it has is the Esper system, but those are just for stats, and those are boring. And the party was just not fun to play as, because most of them are the exact same character until they get, like, their special ability or whatever, but most of those suck. Like, I like Locke as a character, he's one of my favorites in the actual story of Final Fantasy VI, of which there are not many. But his steal ability is fucking useless, so why would I have him in the party over any of the other characters that have more useful abilities? Because my party was, for like 80% of the game, made up of Terra, Celeste, Sabin, and Cyan, because they all have good, like, secondary abilities, and in the case of Celeste, I don't really use Runic like ever, but she already had a high magic stat, and so I just kept improving that magic stat for the rest of the game, and that ended up getting her in my party. Otherwise, I have no idea who I would have put on. Maybe Edgar, because his machine parts were semi-useful, but probably not. And I mentioned it a second ago, but the story wasn't really for me either. I didn't really like it all that much. I thought it was better than 4's story, because I think 4's story kind of sucks, but I didn't like it as much as 5's story, which from what I understand, is a sort of minority opinion, because from what I hear, people don't really like 5's story, but I thought it was pretty okay. I liked the world building, especially once you get to the the third act of the game, and I liked Galoof. He was my favorite character. So, and, you know, Bart's, Lena, and Ferris were also cool. Less so Bart's, because Bart's kind of just an everyman, and he is a little bit lame, but he becomes cooler later on in the game. And one of the coolest things I heard about Final Fantasy VI's story prior to playing it is what happens at the halfway point of the game, or what's kind of the halfway point. And it wasn't as cool as I thought it was going to be. It started off, like, with the proper tone, but as it went on, it felt more meandering, because people started saying the same things, where it's like, damn, sure does suck the world ended, and Kefka's the god of magic or some bullshit. Which, by the way, Kefka also sucks. He's so boring. He's just a crazy guy who wants to kill the world. It's nothing. It's awful. And they get to the end of the game, and they have this big-ass speech about, like, we want to protect the world, and Kefka's like, well, why do you want to protect the world? And everyone gives their heartfelt reasons, and then Kefka's like, ew, nasty. It just ignores it. What's the point? Why even have them talk if his whole thing is going to be, I don't really care, I'm going to destroy the world anyway, just because. But to make a long story short, because I will be returning to Final Fantasy VI for something else, but to make a long story short, there's two things I want to talk about specifically. For one, the Final Fantasy VI near the end was just a bum rush for me, because they make you, well, not make you, This actually ties back to the optional discussion we had earlier, but you are incentivized to grab all your characters back for the second half of the game so you can go face the final boss. But I said fuck that because I wanted to go get Realm and Strago, but when I went to go get Realm, she wasn't spawning in the place she was supposed to spawn, and I was following a guide at that point because, again, I'd given up on Final Fantasy VI, and I was following a guide that was like, okay, now go to this place to get Realm, and I went there, and she wasn't there, and I kept trying to get her to be there, but she wasn't there, so I just gave up and I said, fuck it, I'll go in with the 4. I doubt I'll need everyone anyway. But that was incredibly incorrect, because the final boss will just randomly kill off one of your characters once you get to phases of the boss. So if any of your important characters are killed off, whoops, go fuck yourself. So I had to, what I ended up doing was, instead of my party of 4 actually good characters, I sent in a party of 3 of my good characters, and then one of the characters I didn't level up at all, because, again, this is before EXP share was the thing, so video games were bad back then. But I sent in 3 of my good characters and 1 that wasn't leveled, and just kept the 1 character alive the entire time until it got to the arbitrary killing part, and I hoped that it would kill off that character and not one of the good ones. And luckily it did, which means that I went into the actual final boss with 2 of my good characters, or with 2 of the characters that had survived, and then 1 character that I brought in from the back line. So it was pretty simple past that point, because everyone had Ultima. But yeah, I think that mechanic's fucking stupid, because the final boss otherwise, it's an interesting idea of, like, if any of your characters die, it brings in the rest of your party, but it's not one that I want to engage with when my characters didn't die. You just killed them off for shits and gigs, in a move that I could not have avoided, partially due to ATB, but also because the game was gonna force it anyway. But ATB is a whole different thing. Again, we'll talk about that another time, but for now, the other thing I want to talk about Final Fantasy VI is that I considered whether or not I was getting fatigued by Final Fantasy. Because, again, Final Fantasy VI is one of the beloved games in the franchise. One of, I think, only 3. Itself, 7, and 10. And I guess technically 14 if you want to get pedantic about it, but I don't really count 14 as a mainline Final Fantasy game, even though it's numbered like one, because it's not a Final Fantasy game, it's an MMO. But, point being, it is one of the beloved games of the Final Fantasy series, and I thought it was worse than 5. So I found it weird that I had such a miserable time playing it, because it wasn't that miserable. It wasn't miserable enough to rate it like next to 2, which is one of the worst games I've ever played, or next to 4, which I thought was awful. So what happened? Was it just getting fatigued by Final Fantasy? Is it just too much at once? Because I've played at this point 6 games in the last 6 months, especially because of the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, 5 is the best Final Fantasy game that I've played so far. But it's not my favorite. My favorite Final Fantasy game is 1, because 1 is, for 1, mercifully short. For 2, mercifully simple, and 3, doesn't have anything wrong with it, because when I played 1, I thought it was a game that didn't really have a lot of positives. It is, like, the most bare-bones RPG that you could possibly get. Maybe less so than Dragon Quest, but I haven't played that yet, so. But by Final Fantasy 1, it is super bare bones. There is, like, nothing to that game. The only thing I could possibly praise it for is the magic system being interesting, because it works like a D&D thing, where you have charges on a magic level, not necessarily per spell or an MP gauge. It's very interesting, and I'm glad they brought it back for 3. But otherwise, I have 0 praises for that game. So I think it's like a straight 5 out of 10, because I also don't have any negatives at that game. There was nothing I didn't like in Final Fantasy 1. I thought it was a very fine experience. I had nothing to complain about. So it's possible that maybe I am just getting fatigued by Final Fantasy, because 1 is my favorite game, and that was obviously the first one. I couldn't have been fatigued. And even with 5, which again, I think is the best Final Fantasy game, I didn't like it as much as 1. So maybe I'm just getting tired of it. But then I remembered something. I remembered that another series that I went through in the past year was Metal Gear Solid. And then I remembered that another series I went through in the past year was Devil May Cry. And another one that I went through was Kingdom Hearts. And those are all just as long, if not longer, than Final Fantasy up to this point, for me at least. Because I played 5 Metal Gear Solid games, and I still loved them by the time I got to the end of 5. Obviously, I don't like 2 and 4 as much, but that's because they're bad games, not because I was tired of them. Like I said, I got to 5 and I was still having fun. I've played 6 DMC games, just as many Final Fantasy games that I've played, and they only got better, even with DMC, which I guess is not an improvement from 3, but I played 1, and I didn't like it. I played 2, and I didn't like it to the point I didn't even finish it. Then I played 3, and I loved it. Well, loved's a strong word, but I liked it a lot. And then I played DMC, which I didn't like that much, but it was a fine game. It was like a 6. And then I played 4, which I liked a whole lot, to the point where I almost considered it better than 5, but then I played 5, and I liked that a lot. So I didn't get fatigued by that either, to the point where I'm playing 5 again. And then, God bless Kingdom Hearts. I played 1, and I loved it. And I played Chain of Memories, and I hated it. And I played 2, and I loved it. And then there was like, what, 4 bad Kingdom Hearts games back to back to back? I didn't dislike Birth by Sleep as much then as I do now, but still, it wasn't a great time. To the point where after I finished the first story, I didn't come back to the game for like a week because I didn't want to play the other 2 stories. But even then, so I played like 4 bad Kingdom Hearts games back to back to back, and I still stayed up all night to play 3. I vividly remember having beaten 0.2 and then watching the Union Cross movie and then having to stop myself from playing 3 at that time because I knew that was going to take too long and I was going to play the game forever. And that's what happened. I played the game and beat it in like 3 days. Maybe not 3 days, but I beat it pretty quickly because I wasn't fatigued because the War 3 was a good game. And so I think the problem with Final Fantasy is just that they're bad games. Well, bad's, an overstatement, but they're not that good. And it doesn't help that games like 2 and 4 actually are bad, but 3 being okay and 5 being okay are not helping in making these games any more fun to get through, and then 6 also being okay, but not even as okay as the last one, certainly does not help my enjoyment. So I don't think it has anything to do with me getting fatigued by Final Fantasy. I think I just get fatigued by bad games. The only other argument that I could possibly come up with is that it's different for RPGs because they're longer than other games. Like, even though I played through 6 DMC games and 6 Final Fantasy games, DMC games are nowhere near as long. So that's the difference. But I also played through 8 Ace Attorney games. Now granted, not as quickly as I did Final Fantasy, but still, I played through 8 Ace Attorney games, and I didn't get fatigued by those either. I just thought that they sucked. If anything, I went into the Great Ace Attorney with way more enthusiasm than I did every other Ace Attorney game because the Great Ace Attorney was also hyped up as being one of the best ones, but then I played it, and you know the rest. I've talked about it on the series, and then I played Danganronpa at the same time, and I fucking loved it, which I know it's not the same game, but it has the very same structure, and I fucking loved Danganronpa. Danganronpa is so good. I think the truest answer is really the simplest one, which is I don't like bad games, and so the only reason I'm getting tired of Final Fantasy is because I keep getting bad games. Which is why I am now playing Final Fantasy VII. So I just got straight into the next one because my plan right now is to play through the Final Fantasy VII games that I need to play through, which means the remakes, Crisis Core, watching Advent Children, which I'm not excited for because no one likes that movie, but it's part of Final Fantasy VII, or fucking... But yeah, I'm gonna take a break from Final Fantasy after I play the 7 games, so I can split them at least kind of halfway, because I don't plan on playing the MMOs, and there's only 8, 9, 10... 12, 13, and 15 that I know I'm going to play. 16's pretty much up there because, like, obviously it's a mainline Final Fantasy, but it's on the back burner because I've heard mixed things about whether or not 16's even really a Final Fantasy game at this point, but we'll get there. But yeah, like I said, I only get fatigued by bad games, so if 7 is good, then I won't feel any fatigue. And so far, I'm liking 7, but that's not really saying much, because going into 6, I was also liking it. That's not really a strong recommendation for me, but I was fine with 6 going into it, and I'm fine with 7 going into it. So, unless the game gets better, this is probably going to end up being another Final Fantasy VI, where the game was just okay, and I'm not in the mood for another okay game. I'm not far into it, so I can't really speak on it much, but really the only things I have to say so far are that I like the story. It's more interesting, or at least more engaging to me, than Final Fantasy VI's was. Honestly, it's more engaging than a lot of the Final Fantasy stories have been up to this point. Because I think the only one that compares is 4, but I also thought 4 was a bad game. So, it might be the same, who knows? But I think 4 had a very strong start and then ended up fumbling later. And by later, I mean like only a couple hours later. But yeah, 4 started strong and fumbled, whereas 7 is starting strong and might fumble. I don't know. I only know like vague bits and pieces of 7's story from cultural osmosis. But for the most part, I don't know how things are going to go specifically. So here's hoping the story is actually good. And the story, another thing the story's doing that's making me more engaged with it than any of the previous Final Fantasy games, is that the pacing seems to be way better, which surprises me, because what I find with a lot of 2D series that end up with 3D games is that their pacing, at least story-wise, becomes way, way worse when they go into 3D. It happened to Sonic, it happened to Mario, hell, even games that aren't really like 2D to 3D, like Ace Attorney, it happened to them too, so maybe it's just a curse of 3D, that your pacing will become worse when you do so. Point being, I was expecting Final Fantasy VII to waste way more of my time, because now they have fancy 3D graphics, they can get even more cinematic with the cutscenes, and they're gonna spend all this time on a bunch of bullshit that I don't care about. But that hasn't been the case. I still find it annoying that they have me do things like talk to Jesse to press a button, and then walk 3 steps, and then talk to Biggs to press a button. So, the stuff like that is still stupid, but in terms of like the actual cutscenes, they're fine, actually. they're paced well enough, which again is surprising to me because I didn't think it was going to be that way. Though you could argue this is more of a criticism of the pixel remasters, because, well, I don't know if it's the pixel remasters specifically or if the games that were originally like this too, but the pixel remasters aren't really remasters, so I assume they changed some things. Who knows though? Point being, the pixel Final Fantasy games have not very good pacing. I think their cutscenes are way, way, way too long. I think it doesn't help that because they're pixel, a lot of the things that they try to convey to the player are lost in translation. Like, one of the things that I was able to pick up is that, like, a character would look at the screen and then, like, blink twice or something. That's supposed to be, like, a comedy bit where it's like, oh, that wacky thing that just happened. But because I didn't think the writing was all that good, and because they can't express more than, like, a pause for laughter with these 16 or 32-bit characters, I just didn't really find them all that funny, and I thought that they wasted my time more than anything. That's, like, the example I can actually point out where I at least understood the purpose of it. There are a lot of other times where characters pause or wait for the next text box, and I just had no fucking idea what we were waiting for. It felt so awful, and it might just be in my mind. It's probably just all in my mind, but the cutscenes in the Pixel Remaster games just felt like they wasted my time way, way, way more often, which again is part of why I like Final Fantasy 1 so much. It didn't waste your time with any of that bullshit. There are no cutscenes. And do not mistake this for me saying that I don't want stories in my RPGs or in my games. The point is that I want stories that are good and don't waste my time. Because something like DMC5, I don't think DMC5 has a very good story. I think a lot of it just goes unexplained, at least within the game, and even things that are outside of the game are very shoddy. And for a game that seeks to bring a lot of characters back and reform the DMC timeline, it doesn't really do a good job at using any of those characters in any meaningful capacity. It is very much the Dante V and Nero show, and also Nico. But you're never gonna hear me complain about DMC5's, like, pacing, because it doesn't really waste my time at all. I think the pacing is pretty good, and so I don't really have any complaints about any of that. That applies to a lot of DMC games, of which I don't think have very good stories. But as long as you pace them well, I'm not gonna want to tear my fucking hair out while I'm playing them. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you get games like Xenoblade 3, which I also have complaints with that game's story, but let's just for now say that it's good. It is paced so poorly with some of those cutscenes that I just opened up a fucking YouTube tab and played them all in 2x speed, because I was not having a good time. Though this is already a pretty massive tangent. To bring it back around, let's just say that I wasn't a fan of how Final Fantasy's cutscenes have been paced so far, but 7 is looking to improve that. So even if 7 doesn't really have a good story, I'll at least be more in the mood for it. But then gameplay, which we haven't talked about yet, I just realized, it's fine. It's more ATB, which I hate, so it hasn't moved the needle much on that. And the characters themselves, as far as I can tell, do not have any special abilities that I can make use of, or any special stats that I can make use of, because they want me to use the materia system, which will change your stats. Hopefully not by that much, but we'll see. And I get that limit breaks are like kind of their special abilities, but those are just big damage moves so far. Those aren't like a steal, or like a Terra Trans, or like Sabin's Blitzes, which are also just damage dealing moves, but still. The only thing my characters can do right now is attack and use magic, and even magic isn't special to them because they just have materia. There's no, like, this character uses Bolt, and this character uses Ice, or this character's a healer, or anything like that, at least not that I can tell so far, because everyone just gets their magic from materia. Which you could argue doesn't really matter, that each of the characters can just stand in for whatever you want to do in that turn, but I think a large part of RPGs and keeping them refreshing, at least from a gameplay standpoint, is being able to differentiate between your party and, like, have choices to make, because if your only choices come down to which character models you want to do the things you want to do, then why does it even matter? Though, as far as I understand it, they will differentiate eventually, because I had Tifa just join the party, and she fucking sucks. Her basic attack deals, like, no damage, and her limit break also does, like, no damage, so I think Tifa just can't really do anything right now. She must also have a low magic stat, too, because I gave her the fire materia, and it did, like, 13 damage. So maybe the stat differentiation will come into play for the characters, but even then I can't imagine that being like a huge thing, because there are 9 characters in the game, so they can't make their stats that different without making some characters just suck dick, right? But we shall see. And as for the weekly topic, this one's going to be a little bit shorter than they usually are, because this one's actually about a game I haven't really played yet, which, to be fair, some of the other ones have been too, but this one's about Mario and Luigi Brothership. And my original plan was to have played Brothership at least a significant amount before I got here to this week, so that I could make a more definitive statement about it, but I ended up playing Final Fantasy, and a bunch of other bullshit came up that I had to do, so I couldn't have gotten to Brothership any sooner than I did, which is, I haven't played it at all yet. But specifically, the thing I want to talk about is the IGN review, but even more specifically than that is the people's reaction to the IGN review, and I'm annoyed by the reaction by a lot. And I understand that when you have a series that is widely beloved and has been going for a very long time, it's not going to be very nice to hear someone say like, yeah, the game's back, but it also fucking sucks now. Trust me, I am in that boat too. Mario and Luigi was like in my top 3 of most requested things of all time after Alpha Dream closed. The other two were a Fantasy Life sequel, which might be happening. Who knows? That game might get canceled. Probably not, but it's not looking good right now for level 5. And Kid Icarus Uprising 2, which, fingers crossed. But Mario and Luigi was number 2 on that list, right behind Fantasy Life, and so I was ecstatic to hear that the game's back. I do not want to hear from a reviewer that the game actually sucks. However, I also haven't played the game, so what I will not do is go on the internet and throw a pissy fit about a review for a game that I haven't played yet because I think the review is probably going to be wrong. However, Mario and Luigi fans did not feel the same way. They threw all kinds of fits. God bless the fucking like-to-dislike ratio on the IGN review on YouTube, and God did bless the comment section. The comment section is full of people who I know for a fact had not played the game yet, because it was like a week before the game came out. So it's legit a comment section full of people complaining about a review that doesn't like a game that they don't even know if they'll like yet, which is stupid. Especially when in the IGN review, they made very fair points. They said it's kind of stupid that Luigi feels like an NPC now, because it is. It's Mario and Luigi, not Mario the main character and Luigi's also there, I guess. Luigi logic is stupid. Don't give a name for a thing in any other Mario and Luigi game that would have just happened. Luigi would just go up to Mario and be like, oh, and then he would just go up to the wall and squeeze through it. He wouldn't have to play an animation, he wouldn't have to go up to the wall, think to himself, and then have a fucking pig go, hey, Luigi, do you have an idea? And then play a whole fucking animation of Luigi going like, yeah, I do have an idea. And then have it play out in the overworld. Just fucking do it, dude. It's better when it happens in the battles because that's like a dynamic part of the actual battle happening, but that was the IGN reviewer praised. He praised the battle parts because the battle parts are like the best part of the Mario and Luigi games. So obviously that's the part he's gonna praise, and you people still got mad. Things like performance issues just make sense. That's objectively a bad thing if the game is stuttering. And if people were going to the comment section being like, well, I played the game and it wasn't really stuttering for me, for one, that's anecdotal. But sure, let's go with that. Let's even just say, okay, people played the game and they didn't notice any of these frame drop problems. So that's like a big part of the review that's just disqualified now. But again, this was before people had played the game, so they did not know if the frame drops were real or not. They just started throwing fits because it probably wasn't the truth, which isn't even the case because the fucking Switch, every game has frame drops. The ship is stupid. Just have it be an overworld. Why are you making me get on a fucking hub world to sail across to other islands? Just have it be one connected thing like every other Mario and Luigi game. Even Bowser's Inside Story has you going between 2 different worlds, and you can still just go into a pipe and end up back on the overworld. You don't have to waste time with a bunch of stupid bullshit. The only part of the review that I think is fair to criticize the IGN for is the part about the writing, because the Mario and Luigi games have all had pretty good writing, even the weaker ones except for Paper Jam. So I think it's fair for people to have doubts about IGN being like, oh yeah, the writing sucks this time. But even then, I don't know if that's the case either, because I feel like a different person is writing the games now. I don't know if it's the same person, because Alpha Dream's a whole different thing. But if it's a different person or different people writing the game now, then obviously it's fair to say that the writing is going to be different. And then finally, there's a thing that I mentioned before with Sonic games, how everyone is like, IGN, don't take their opinion for anything, none of it matters, until Sonic X Shadow Generations got a 9 out of 10. And then, holy shit, IGN gave it a 9 out of 10, the game must be good. And I understand that the Mario and Sonic communities are pretty different for the most part, so these aren't the same people saying these things. However, I just find it very funny how we're very selective about when to take IGN seriously and when to not. And I had considered talking about the Sonic fans' response to this being like, well, our game got a 9, so what does that say about Mario and Luigi? But I don't really seem to talk about it because it would just be me reiterating the point I made like a couple of episodes ago about how Sonic fans are like kicked dogs now, where any sort of perceived slight against them is like a whole fucking thing, which I myself have experienced at this point. So, like I said, it's a whole fucking thing with them, and so I'm not gonna either say one way or the other that like, oh, Sonic fans are being too cocky now, because that part would just be me reiterating what I said before. But I'm also not gonna say that, oh yeah, they are allowed to make fun of Mario fans now, because again, why are we taking IGN seriously now when previously they said that Sonic games were never good? So no matter which I comment on, it's all gonna be the same stupid bullshit that I don't care about. So for now, let's just leave it at Sonic fans are in fact being cocky about this, and they certainly are doing that on Twitter.com. So that's just how that is. There is no lesson to learn here. Don't judge people's reviews about video games, or video games themselves for that matter, before you've ever actually played them, because that's fucking stupid. Bye.